Chapter 24 of Anna Karenina, Book 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Morgan Golf French. Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Constance Scarnett. Book 3, Chapter 24. The night spent by Levin on the haycock did not pass without result for him. The way in which he had been managing his land revolted him, and had lost all attraction for him. In spite of the magnificent harvest, never had there been, or at least never it seemed to him, had there been so many hindrances and so many quarrels between him and the peasants as that year, and the origin of these failures and this hostility was now perfectly comprehensible to him. The delight he had experienced in the work itself, and the consequent greater intimacy with the peasants, the envy he felt of them, of their life, their desire to adopt that life, which had been to him that night not a dream, but an intention, the execution of which he had thought out in detail, all this had so transformed his view of the farming of the land as he had managed it, that he could not take his former interest in it, and could not help seeing that unpleasant relation between him and the work-people which was the foundation of it all. The herd of improved cows, such as Pava, the whole land ploughed over and enriched, the 9 level fields surrounded with hedges, the 240 acres heavily manured, the seeds sown in drills, and all the rest of it. It was all splendid if only the work had been done for themselves, or for themselves and comrades, people in sympathy with them. But he saw clearly now, his work on a book of agriculture, in which the chief element in husbandry was to have been the labourer, greatly assisted him in this, that the sort of farming he was carrying on was nothing but a cruel and stubborn struggle against him and the labourers, in which there was on one side, his side, a continual intense effort to change everything to a pattern he considered better, on the other side the natural order of things, and in this struggle he saw that with immense expenditure of force on his side, and with no effort or even intention on the other side, all that was attained was that the work did not go to the liking of either side, and that splendid tools, splendid cattle and land were spoiled with no good to anyone. Worst of all, the energy expended on this work was not simply wasted. He could not help feeling now, since the meaning of this system had become clear to him, that the aim of his energy was a most unworthy one. In reality, what was the struggle about? He was struggling for every farthing of his share, and he could not help it, for he had only to relax his efforts, and he would not have had the money to pay his labourers' wages. While they were only struggling to be able to do their work easily and agreeably, that is to say, as they were used to doing it, it was for his interest that every labourer should work as hard as possible, and that while doing so he should keep his wits about him, so as to try not to break the winnowing machines, the horse rakes, the thrashing machines, that he should attend to what he was doing. What the labourer wanted was to work as pleasantly as possible, with rest, and above all, carelessly and heedlessly, without thinking. That summer Levin saw this at every step. He sent the men to mow some clover for hay, picking out the worst patches where the clover was overgrown with grass and weeds and of no use for seed. Again and again they mowed the best acres of clover, justifying themselves by the pretence that the bailiff had told them to, and trying to pacify him with the assurance that it would be splendid hay, but he knew that it was owing to those acres being so much easier to mow. He sent out a hay machine for pitching the hay. It was broken at the first row, because it was dull work for a peasant to sit on the seat in front with the great wings waving above him, and he was told, "Don't trouble, your honour, sure the women folks will pitch it quick enough." The ploughs were practically useless, because it never occurred to the labourer to raise the share when he turned the plough, and forcing it round, he strained the horses and tore up the ground, and Levin was begged not to mind about it. The horses were allowed to stray into the wheat, because not a single labourer would consent to be night watchman, and in spite of orders to the contrary, the labourers insisted on taking turns for night duty, and Ivan, after working all day long, fell asleep and was very penitent for his fault, saying, "Do what you will to me, your honour." They killed 3 of the best calves by letting them into the clover aftermath without care as to their drinking, and nothing would make the men believe that they had been blown out by the clover. But they told him, by way of consolation, that one of his neighbours had lost 112 head of cattle in 3 days. All this happened not because anyone felt ill will to Levin or his farm. On the contrary, he knew that they liked him, thought him a simple gentleman, their highest praise. But it happened simply because all they wanted was to work merrily and carelessly, and his interests were not only remote and incomprehensible to them, but fatally opposed to their most just claims. Long before, Levin had felt dissatisfaction with his own position in regard to the land. He saw where his boat leaked, but he did not look for the leak, perhaps purposely deceiving himself. Nothing would be left him if he lost faith in it. But now he could deceive himself no longer. The farming of the land, as he was managing it, had become not merely unattractive but revolting to him, and he could take no further interest in it. To this was joined the presence, only 25 miles off, of Kitty Shcherbatskaya, who he longed to see and could not see. Darya Alexandrovna Oblonskaya had invited him, when he was over there, to come with the object of renewing his offer to her sister, who would, so she gave him to understand, accept him now. Levin himself had felt on seeing Kitty Shcherbatskaya that he had never ceased to love her, but he could not go over to the Oblonskys, knowing she was there. The fact that he had made her an offer, and she had refused him, had placed an insuperable barrier between her and him. "I can't ask her to be my wife merely because she can't be the wife of the man she wanted to marry," he said to himself. The thought of this made him cold and hostile to her. "I should not be able to speak to her without a feeling of reproach. I could not look at her without resentment, and she will only hate me all the more, and as she's bound to. And besides, how can I now, after what Darya Alexandrovna told me, go to see them? Can I help showing that I know what she told me, and me to go magnanimously to forgive her and have pity on her, me go through a performance before her of forgiving, and deigning to bestow my love on her? What induced Darya Alexandrovna to tell me that? By chance I might have seen her, then everything would have happened of itself. But as it is, it's out of the question, out of the question." Darya Alexandrovna sent him a letter, asking him for a side-saddle for Kitty's use. "I am told you have a side-saddle," she wrote to him. "I hope you will bring it over yourself." This was more than he could stand. How could a woman of any intelligence, of any delicacy, put her sister in such a humiliating position? He wrote 10 notes, and tore them all up, and sent the saddle without any reply. To write that he would go was impossible, because he could not go. To write that he could not come because something prevented him, or that he could not be away, that was still worse. He sent the saddle without an answer, and with a sense of having done something shameful. He handed over all the now revolting business of the estate to the bailiff, and set off next day to a remote district to see his friend Sviazhsky, who had splendid marshes for grouse in his neighbourhood, and had lately written to ask him to keep a long-standing promise to stay with him. The grouse marsh in the Surovsky district had long tempted Levin, but he had continually put off his visit on account of his work on the estate. Now he was glad to get away from the neighbourhood of the Shcherbatskys, and still more from his farm work, especially on a shooting expedition, which always in trouble served as the best consolation. End of chapter 24. Recording by Morgan Gall French, London.